Hey family, thank you for tuning into Our Roots podcast with 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗲. We're only the strongest roots, see the light, brought to you by Botanica candles and more. And if you haven't had the opportunity, please like this video, share, comment, and be sure to subscribe. What's up, Phil?
Hey, happy Sunday. And also don't forget to join our membership program. That means we got tons of perks for you guys, extra shows, Q&As. You can video chat with us and discounts on merch. So everything's good today, man. Everything's good with you?
Everything's fabulous. Yeah, guys, and if you're not in the membership program, please consider it and be sure to let somebody else know about it that may be able to gain some value, exclusive videos, exclusive interactions, lives every month just for you guys, especially the VIPs, and just really great value that we can provide through the membership program. So take a look.
All right. So what are we talking about today?
So today we're going to talk about a topic that has been kind of, gaining momentum within not necessarily the practice of 𝗲𝗲, but the social media aspect, which is the concept of self-initiation. So now with 𝗲𝗲 becoming much more socially acceptable and visible, a lot of people are like, well, being that orisha is a nature-based practice and, everyone has the right to practice orisha, why do I need an elder to be able to become a part of this practice? So we really wanted to go over the current state of affairs and then the reasons that 𝗲𝗲 gives why everybody needs elders or people to bring them in. So what we're going to go ahead and do is start right from birth, right? So when we look at the concept of 𝗲𝗲 is nothing more than basically a mirror image spiritually of nature. So when we come into the world, we're brought in by two people biologically. Our father, and ultimately, and most importantly, our mother, who actually is, the vessel and who facilitates all of this. So going right to creation, 𝗲𝗲 and God saw fit for us to have people to look up to, right? And, it's the same thing within the practice of 𝗲𝗲, because 𝗲𝗲, like I said, is a recreation of nature. Everybody needs parents. Everyone needs mentors and guides to be able to get them towards basically their goals. So when we look at especially the role that 𝗲𝗲 and Santeria played within Cuba, we're talking about a people who just went through one of the most traumatic instances in all of humanity or human history of being taken from their homeland to a completely foreign land. So some of those people were young, right? They lost their mothers, they lost their fathers, their family, their identity, their lineages that they had preserved for basically eons.
Can I interrupt you real quick?
Absolutely.
So when I explain what you do, who you are, the channel, all that, and I explain what 𝗲𝗲 is and how it got to Cuba, not one single person knew that the slave trade even went to Cuba.
Yeah, well, put it this way, Cuba has been a polemic topic in itself, especially based on its position. That's why Cuba was known as 𝗲𝗶𝗸𝗲, or the Pearl, because it was right smack dab in the middle of the Caribbean. It was basically the gateway between the East and the West, because let's say, the unfortunate, trade of slaves that was occurring, you had to go through Cuba to be able to take them to other countries in South America. That's why if you noticed along the east coast of South America in places like Cartagena in Colombia, from what I understand, or any of those coastal cities, you see people looking much more ethnic and Afro-descendant. So Cuba was basically the hub based on its size, based on its position, based on the resources, based on the discovery, of things like tobacco, being able to harness things like sugarcane, things that were very lucrative that needed a workforce. And unfortunately, our ancestors ended up, becoming basically the majority there to be able to perform this labor. So Cuba was absolutely essential. Without Cuba, I don't think it would have been able to happen. So, unfortunate. But, when these people came over and they basically lost everything, most importantly, their identity to a certain degree, they started recreating this concept of family, or this institution of family, spiritually, where the people who initiated you literally became your mother and father because you had no one else. And I can attest to the fact that in Cuba and in this country, at least when 𝗲𝗲 was first coming over, I would say up until about, if 𝗲𝗲 came over, formally in the 50s, from what I heard, to New York, I would say it was really, really very literal up until about maybe the mid 90s. That concept of, hey, these people that are initiating me or bringing me in, this is my mother and this is my father. And it came with all the benefits, and it came with all of the, the uncomfortabilities as well, where that person, might criticize you or might have said words for you, but what are you going to say? Like when my grandmother used to tell me a couple things before I left the house, I'd be incapable of saying anything back to her that wasn't yes ma'am and I'll see you later, regardless of whatever her last words were. So it was really that intense, and it was that serious, because those people were performing that role when it seemed to still be necessary. But now that we're in a time where, possibly economics is influencing people so much, they kind of want to eliminate the idea of I have to pay somebody to facilitate me going through this ceremonial and ritualistic process to be able to have this rank or position or have access to this knowledge. But one thing that I think some people are not really focusing on is the sacrifice that it takes to be able to get to a position to be able to teach,
Hold on, I think you're moving a little too fast.
Yeah.
So why do you think that, and let me apologize for butting in.
No.
That's the way my brain works. I'm sure
Sure.
a lot of people in the comments are probably thinking the same thing, though. So it's good to take a break. You mentioned that people, almost like people don't respect those traditions, pretty much. Like, why do you think that is now?
I think society is changing overall. We used to have certain concepts of loyalty and, obligation to, our elders, specifically our parents, our ancestors. And I think that was pretty universal. But then when you get into like, I think, late 80s, early 90s, I think we start seeing a serious shift because of the necessity that started really presenting itself, whether it was Cuba, whether it was the world over, where it's leading up to like a bombastic event like a COVID, where it's like we really don't have time for those institutions or to maintain them, especially when money's so tight and, our economic situation is pretty pessimistic. Most people, maybe they don't have time to, call their parents. Maybe they don't have time to be a parent themselves per se. I mean, daycare rates and all these things are at a record high. Procreation is actually at a record low. We're actually facing population collapse. These are things that I don't know if it's a larger, presence at hand that wants us to start losing ourselves and identity once again, because when we don't know who we are, where we come from, naturally we become weaker, because when you don't know where you come from, you don't know your value. And if you don't know your value, someone can place a value upon you.
Ooh.
So I think that's really what's occurring is society at large. I think they might not have the time or the energy to be able to focus on things like before. Because at the end of the day, when you're focusing on how am I going to feed these children, how am I going to provide for them, make sure they're getting, decent care, and when it's as stressful as it is right now, like when I converse with some people or some people that I attend to that reach out to me, it's really a miracle that anybody's kind of holding anything together right now. So the first thing that goes out the window is family. I mean, you talk to most people, they don't even, some people can't even remember the last time they sat down and ate dinner as a family.
Ooh, man, yeah. I mean, everybody's so engaged in other activities. Like the TV's on, the internet is available, they're on their phones, and I can't even say that when the last time. I mean, how many people even have a dining room anymore?
Yeah, or even, I remember when I was a young man, my grandmother had like 2 sets of fine china that she would switch out.
Or in that cabinet that no one touched.
Or in the room that no one went in, so. And I think social media and technology has a lot to do with it as well. Now, mind you, I'm not a fundamentalist to the point where I'm like, technology hasn't helped. It's greatly helped, because me as a father and somebody that's working, every day, after a long day of, being a dad and being a 𝗲𝗷𝗋 or a professional, whatever you want to term, when I'm laying in bed and I have that last hour before I go to bed, me being able to look on my phone and study 𝗲𝗲 has greatly helped me. Where, back when I first started, I used to be able to lock myself in a room, have this 1,000-page book and just eat away at it for 8 hours a day. As you start having more obligations, you begin to realize I need to accommodate my studies to my lifestyle, because if not, both are going to become stagnant.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Yeah.
About the 𝗲𝗲 you see online.
Yes.
Like, with the availability of everything being online, and you knowing the history, you know your stuff when it comes to 𝗲𝗲.
Yes,
the
sir.
stuff that you see online, is some of it inaccurate?
I would say most of it's inaccurate.
Most of it is inaccurate.
I would say the majority of it is inaccurate.
Whoa!
I would say 97% of it is inaccurate.
Oh my gosh! Why?
I think what happens is we became kind of like a regurgitative demographic at some point, where some people maybe had these concepts back then of, I'm not going to deal with my godfather, or I'm not going to, spend the time and energy it takes to build that confidence to be able to receive certain bits of information. Some people started outsourcing, either they started making things up and putting it on a piece of paper and it sounded fantastical enough to where somebody would buy it, or they had a little bit, made up the rest as they went, stole some information that might not have been true, because that's another thing. The elders back in the day, like the old school 𝗲𝗏𝗍𝗲s, they would actually put out false information. And the reason being is they would leave it there to see who was going to last the apprenticeship process or not. And the guys who didn't, they kind of knew who wasn't going to, and they would, put that information in front of them. So that same information that they thought was authentic was basically being propagated by them, but it was a way for people to know who really knew and who didn't. Like, for example, if somebody comes to me with a piece of literature, or I see them practicing a certain way within a ceremony, I know whether they're apt in 𝗲𝗏 or not immediately, just based on the information that they apply, where, to be honest with you, a lot of it is fluff and misdirection, and usually real authentic 𝗲𝗏 is actually much simpler than some of the things that, most people would consider, legitimate or useful. I've had, unfortunately, uncomfortable conversations with brothers. Like, they'll come to me, they'll be like, hey, I'd like you to direct, I don't know, a 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗄 or a 𝗀𝗏𝗄𝗏 process. And, at the end of the day, I respect whatever the Godfather wants, because at the end of the day, I'm a contracted professional. But, I'll look at certain processes and I'll be like, wow, that's a little unnecessary. That's a little bit monotonous. That's a little bit rudimentary. But, you kind of, you learn to accept, not everybody had the same privileges that some of us did. But also, it's also about fortitude and that, obligation. Like, for example, my godfather, before I was given the absolute expressed right to be able to direct 𝗲𝗏 ceremonies on my own, or, initiate other, 𝗲𝗏𝗍𝗏s on my own, it was about 8 years. You know what I'm saying? And that doesn't include the 2 to 3 years before that, where I just had hand of 𝗲𝗏. And, he'd be like, hey, I need you to call, I don't know, the IRS for me to translate. Or, I need you to take this to the mail. Or, I need somebody to take me to the supermarket, when he had just come over from Cuba and things like that. So those are the things, believe it or not, that most would see as unconventional, that's going to help fortify that bond. And mind you, I wasn't at that point as an 18-year-old man saying, wow, I'm going to do this stuff for this guy just so he can give me this information. I just wanted to be around him. I just wanted to be able to build a relationship with somebody that was actually going to have an expressed interest in my growth. I mean, coming from a single mother home, being raised by my grandmother and mom, and mind you, I had male role models. I found them to be positive, but they were a little unconventional just based on their lifestyle, which are my uncles and things like that. They were outside, as we'd like to say. So it wasn't necessarily the path I was trying to go down. So I was looking for somebody that was more in line with what my goals were, that was actually going to care. And, definitely my godfather, just like my godmother, who initiated me in Orisha beforehand, they filled a role, definitely, in a space that I was looking for, specifically within 𝗲𝗏 and Orisha. So to kind of bring it back full circle now, a lot of people don't see the need for that. And it's ironic, because the same people who don't see the need for it are the same ones that, when they get into a position of influence or, being an elder, they want all the attention on them. And sometimes that stunts their initiate's growth. And what's even more ironic is the Orishas themselves felt the need to seek out elders and guides to be able to bring them back to the truth, which is 𝗲𝗏. So what I want to do now is I'm going to delve into the different Orishas that there's actually scripture of where they got initiated and by whom. And I'd really like to go back all the way to the beginning. The Yoruba culture, per se, if we're talking about realistically, or within the manifestation of like nature, existed before Odua arrived. Like, they were a clan, they were a people. They weren't necessarily unified and organized as far as a structure, because they were looking for someone to lead them. So when we look at the life story of a gentleman known as Odua, this is one of the various versions, because there's versions where there was a female Odua, or when Odua came in and conquered the tribe of Obatala and Ife and took it over. I just want to focus on this specific story that's in the 𝗀𝗏𝗍𝗏, because it talks about the dawn of our spiritual practice and context. So when Odua is fleeing Benin, being that he was going to be executed because he was the illegitimate son of one of the last kings over there, being that he wasn't able to beget an heir with any of his official wives, they were supposed to give the crown to him, but they didn't want to because, you know, he was a slave child, right? So his mother, realizing that there was going to be an attempt on his life, told him to flee. And some people say he never saw his mom again, which is kind of sad.
Yeah.
But he fled. And that's why some people say, no, 𝗀𝗲𝗃 came from the east, or the northeast, or the north, however you want to interpret what was said. But he was coming from the land of Benin, or 𝗃𝗲𝗿𝗄, as it's known. Like Jaman Hansu, like where he's from.
You don't actually know him.
Yeah, I remember you told me, man. What a gentleman, you know.
It's Jaimin.
Jaimin, forgive me. I always mispronounce it.
He always corrects everybody. He's like, it's like Simon, but Jai.
Yeah, beautiful name. I get the last name right. And when Odua arrives, there was actually a divination that had been performed by the Babalawos there, where the 𝗿𝗶𝗸𝗲𝗍 came out, where it said that the next gentleman that came fleeing from the east towards them was someone that they were supposed to make king and follow, right? So when Odua arrives after days of basically running for his life, in the intermediary, he would fall asleep and, have these dreams of this like ceremony and things being done to him and his head and, a bunch of things. And he's like, I don't know, man, I think I should remember this. It was actually his awakening process that was occurring towards his destiny. So when he arrives in Yoruba land, specifically the land of Ife, they look at him and they all basically start worshiping him and bowing to him. And he was like, why do I receive this courtesy? And they said, well, we're said people. We have this system that we utilize. And, it's said that the next person with your characteristics, we were supposed to crown. And he said, okay. And they said, well, we don't know how to crown anybody because we've never had a king before. So they told us that you would have the answers. And he said, well, check this out. I really, I have my customs that I had beforehand, but I was never crowned over there. So I never got to see anything. I do have royal blood, but I've been having these dreams as I've been coming over. And it seems like something similar, it eradicates around the head. Maybe we could recreate it, but I can't do it to myself. I need someone else to do it for me. And at that point, 𝗏𝗏𝗏 and, the other, initiates that were there said, well, let's go ahead and recreate it. And that is the initiation process that we have today. Now, the reason I want to bring up this point initially is because Odua, through divine intervention, inspiration, dreams, his ancestors, was given the template and formula to be able to initiate somebody into Orisha. That's why Odua is known as the Olofin of Orisha, or the guy who kind of dominates that process. And even though he had all the information in the world, he actually had the information that the people who ultimately initiated him did not. He allowed them to perform the rites for him because he realized, I don't have enough hands or I can't look at myself while I'm doing this. He had them do it. And when they performed the process to him, they crowned him Oni, right? Or king. And basically, we still recreate that to that day. So I think that's a very important point for anyone who's a proponent for self-initiation, because if you look at self-initiation, I think people are taking it a little bit too literally. I think self-initiation has more to do with a mental, metaphysical process rather than things that actually have to be done by other human beings, because it is physically impossible for us to do them to ourselves, which Odua realized. And he could have easily tried to do it, but he would have also failed. So if our spiritual Messiah and primordial ancestor literally enlisted other people and elders to be able to initiate him, which some people say 𝗏𝗏𝗏 was his godfather, then why can't we? But I think the difference is Odua came in a place of need. He didn't have any ego. He understood providence. And I think he was an open-minded guy to say, hey, if these people are willing to accept me, I have to give them the position of being able to, elevate me to the position they want me in. So that takes a certain level of humility on my behalf. And we have a spirituality till this day and processes because of it. So that's really the first point I want to make. Our guy, even Odua, who's the first guy to ever go through the Orisha process, enlisted the Babalawos to basically perform it for him. So I think that's a huge, huge, huge point. Another person, and this is in the 𝗿𝗲𝗍𝗁 as well, was Orunmila. Orunmila actually was initiated, and this is where Ifa can get a little convoluted, because this is where it can seem confusing, because there's versions in the 𝗿𝗲𝗍𝗁 where when Orunmila went to do Ifa and he reincarnated, they say that the person who initiated him into Ifa was Odua, and his Ojubona was Oro, right, who was Oduduwa's son. Now, most people will hear the first story I said and say, whoa, Baba. Well, how is it possible that he was able to do that, but then, Odua initiated him, and it just sounds like a big, a big gumbo. We have to understand that Ifa functions on parallel universes, timelines, reincarnations. Just because the same name is used in a different story doesn't mean it was the same incarnation when the first one happened, or whichever one you read first happened, right? So when we look at somebody like Orunmila, who till this day is recognized as the master manipulator of Ifa, which is the voice of Olodumare, even when he reincarnated, he had to go through his hand of Ifa process, where 𝗿𝗲𝗍𝗶 was revealed. He had to go through his Ifa process, where 𝗿𝗲𝗍𝗶 was revealed again, and his elders were Odudua and Oro. So if, once again, someone such as Orunmila, the basically the apex 𝗲𝗏𝗍𝗁 sought other people to perform Ifa initiation for him. Even him having divine inspiration and dreams and awakenings and all these other, reasons that people find self-initiation legitimate, he still was like, I can't do this to myself, And then there's also this concept of obligation as well, because you have to look at the economic aspect of things, which may be motivating things quite a bit now, where Orisha initiation and Ifa initiation could be thousands of dollars. Maybe I could just avoid that and just do it myself, and then, but there has to be a certain code of conduct and ethics system. No one should ever be asked of something that the person asking them to do has not done. So when I ask somebody for a sum of money or a cost for a ceremony that I'm going to be performing for them, relatively I paid the same thing, if not more, maybe a little less. I don't know. I mean, times change, especially depending on the date when somebody was initiated. That shouldn't be neither here nor there. The most important thing is the quality of the process, and also investing in the preparation of the person that you've grown an affinity for, which will ultimately become your elders. And I think that sense of obligation now is gone, because everybody's all about instant gratification, independence. I don't need anybody. We don't need to go to school. YouTube, I'll just make a video. No one wants to go through that process, which is really a beautiful one. And that same process of apprenticeship is in the 𝗿𝗲𝗍𝗁𝗃. We have to be careful with concepts such as self-initiation, because self-initiation is technically taboo within Ifa. And the 𝗿𝗲𝗍𝗁𝗃 was where it speaks of the Masons, not necessarily the fraternal organization, even though what I'm talking about birthed them to a certain degree. You had the elder Masons and you had the younger ones, right? And mind you, the older ones had wisdom and process and experience. The younger ones had a lot of strength, ambition, talent. And one day, the young Masons were basically saying, we don't need the approval of our elders or their presence to be able to do what we want to do, because to be a part of that, I guess union, you had to pay dues, and there was a fund and all these other things. They were like, we don't want to do that no more. Our money's our own.
That's like, you're not supposed to do that, though.
Absolutely not. Do that in the 80s in New York. How did that go? So, but so they did it without him, and they built a temple. But the problem is they built it on sand, something that the elders would have told them not to. But being that they weren't getting their dues, and the youth didn't want to basically, compensate the elders for the advice and all the benefits they were providing, it was a really tragic event where that castle fell on the king and killed him. So guess what? All of the young Masons got executed by the prince. So from that day forward, everyone said, even if the elders don't lift up by a rock, a pencil, anything, you have to have them around, because there's something that they have that isn't tangible or quantified, which is experience. So here's the thing, right? I have elders in Cuba. I do. And, some people are shocked by that. They're like, Baba, you still learn things, or you still have questions to ask? I say every day, all day. It's a thirst that I have. So I have elders in Cuba, like, the gentlemen that have given me certain deities like Odua, etc. If it's Christmas, I send them something. If it's their Ifa birthday, I send them something. If I use any of the deities that they gave me to be able to initiate somebody else, I send them 10% because it's that obligation. Because I don't ever want to be in a position, and luckily I'm not to where I need anything from anybody. But God forbid, let's say I'm a 𝗲𝗶𝗍𝗲 that gave out, I don't know, 100 Oduduas, right? And those Oduduas birthed 100 Oduduas each, and no one sent me anything. And forget about the money. A thank you, a gesture, anything. You know, that's a horrible situation to be in. 80 years old, 85 years old, sitting in Havana where the electricity goes out, and, you know, wow, no one had anything to say to me after I was compensated for what they paid me to do, but there was no sense of obligation whatsoever. Ifa says this is taboo completely. Now, it's not that you have to give in a way where your family is left in a state of need, but remember that appreciation is the memory of the heart. So that's in the 𝗀𝗶𝗍𝗲. And sometimes that appreciation is expressed economically. It's expressed through throwing yourself on the floor to somebody, you know, and waiting for them to lift you up. You know, it's the most honorable thing when you could lay yourself in front of your elders and they can basically raise you up in a way where they're proud of what you've been able to accomplish. That's what this is all about, being able to help each other, being able to support each other. But now we're entering into a space where society doesn't deem that necessary because, you know, some people have been traumatized, or some of the people that are even pushing that vernacular are the ones who are trying to receive more funds. I mean, it can get very convoluted very quickly. So,
Wow.
So when we're talking about other Orishas that actually had initiatory processes when they could have done it themselves, being that they were gods, another one was 𝗀𝗲𝗍𝗶. In the Odua of
That's the
Osun,
volcano guy.
yeah, the earthquakes, tectonic plate movement, all of that, the deserts. When 𝗀𝗲𝗍𝗶 was born, he was actually the illegitimate son of a king, right? Presumably from Oyo, being that that's the lineage that all those guys come from, or maybe the land of 𝘃𝗀𝗄. And when he was born, it was identified via his hand of Ifa that he was meant to be initiated into the rites of Orisha. Now, mind you, his mother, I mean, spiritually was, you know, Mother Earth, right? Even though he had a physical mother, his essence came from the earth itself. You know, his father was the king, you know, all of these different aspects. And even with that, 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗲 was still selected by 𝗀𝗲𝗍𝗶 and his earth mother to be able to initiate him into Orisha, right? Being that 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗲 had the knowledge at that point to be able to facilitate it. And presumably this took place in Africa where, you know, the 𝘃𝗂𝗃𝗃 brothers can still initiate people in Orisha. And 𝗀𝗲𝗍𝗶 actually was initiated by 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗲. And, you know, there's the famous story where 𝗀𝗲𝗍𝗶 is brought out of the jungle towards the palace and he's finally recognized by his father. And, you know, out of joy and rejoice, Mother Earth opens up and explodes, which is where the first volcano kind of, you know, exploded. But far enough away to where nobody got hurt, right? They also say it rumbled. So it's another prime example of an Orisha who went under the tutelage of somebody else to be able to fulfill their destiny. Because just because an iromole, or an essence of light, came down in a human body and being, doesn't mean that they are above or exempt from the, you know, requirements that need to happen to be able to reconnect that link. When we initiate into Orisha or Ifa or any of these other things, all we're doing is reestablishing the link between our earthly self of flesh and our ancestral selves. That's all that's occurring. And ironically, when we align with our ancestors and nature in this very specific way, things go well, especially if we listen to the advice that's being provided to us by the deities being received and initiated into. So 𝗀𝗲𝗍𝗶 is another perfect example. Another example is the Orisha 𝘃𝗀𝗃. We actually just spoke about this in a recent live, but it's worth a mention here. 𝘃𝗀𝗃 was the son of Ode, who can be interpreted as the hunter deity in general, or possibly even 𝗲𝗶𝗍𝗲, because 𝗲𝗶𝗍𝗲 is known as Baba Ode, and Yemoja, right? His earth parents, you know. He didn't feel like he was readily accepted in their, you know, in the constructs of their home. So he said, I need to find another family or somebody that's going to be able to guide me in a way towards the things that I want to learn about. So he ultimately left and went to live in the jungle, and he started hearing about this hunter who was also an amazing fisherman, physician, botanist, all of these different things. And ultimately he found him, and that gentleman's name was Erinle, or Inle. When 𝘃𝗀𝗃 presented himself, 𝗃𝗀 was impressed because he saw that the young man had talent, but with his help, he could be possibly the best ever. So literally, 𝗃𝗀 and his wife 𝗵𝗸𝗲 adopted 𝘃𝗀𝗃 in the apprenticeship context and started teaching him the different ways of the woods, right? He taught him how to hunt at a supreme level, taught him how to fish, how to cure people, how to use herbs. It was one of the most complete educations you could ever find within the mythology of Ifa. So when it came time now to take 𝘃𝗀𝗃 into the, initiation rites of the hunters or any of the various things that he had become proficient at, 𝗃𝗀, realizing that he couldn't do it alone and his wife couldn't initiate him into the, some of the masculine things, contracted Osun to be able to be 𝘃𝗀𝗃𝗀 𝗀𝗲𝗿𝗲, which is the second godfather or the person who watches the path for the Yawor initiate. And Osun imparted that knowledge upon 𝘃𝗀𝗃 as well. And they took 𝘃𝗀𝗃 through the initiation rites, thus facilitating him becoming an orisha one day. So 𝘃𝗀𝗃 could have said, hey, I learned what I learned from 𝗃𝗀 and Osun. I don't need them anymore. I'll do it for myself. Or I don't need to find this guy 𝗃𝗀. I know enough. I'll just say I am what I want to say. All of these different paths could have been taken. But under the guidance of Orumila and just respecting the traditions that our ancestors left in place for us thousands of years ago, he's like, no, I need somebody to take me through, somebody that's going to help mold me and guide me. Because you can always tell who's been guided and who hasn't. When you look at some, personalities online, and to each his own, you could tell who's gone through the apprenticeship process, who's been refined, who knows how to speak, who knows how to function and practice, and those who are self-taught. And usually the ones who are self-taught are usually worse at what they do than the ones who weren't taught at all. They might as well have not been taught by anybody, let alone themselves.
Ooh.
So, that's when you begin to realize, why would I want to receive services or mentorship from somebody who never received mentorship from anybody? And that's what we're going through now online, is because, we have a substantial following. It's nothing to blink at. But you have people who have 500,000, 700,000, maybe in 1 million followers, 1 million views, things like that. Really astronomical numbers. Are they initiated? Are they people that actually learned with people who were in direct contact with certain ancestors? People who knew, people who left behind information and things at this point that are literally antiques. Most of them aren't, and they're the same ones who are like, yeah, you don't need mentorship, but please join my membership program. So there's a little bit of inconsistency there that's a little bit alarming, because it's like, if it's good for me, why wasn't it good for you? So there has to be, some level of consistency, and the majority of the stuff online isn't, because the information comes from, dubious sources, or the person can't say, hey, I learned with this person. That's another thing. No one likes to give anybody their flowers no more. I'll mention all my elders till I'm blue in the face, whether some are known or not, because they were important to me. They taught me things. They helped refine me and make me into the 𝗲𝗲𝗍 and ultimately man I am today. But you look at some people online and they get questioned publicly about it. They're like, hey, who taught you how to do this? And they'll curve the question, or, it just becomes a whole nother segue into something more trivial than what they were talking about.
So why even get into this if you're not going to follow the proper practices? Is it because they see it as a money grab? Like I don't get it.
This is the only profession where you don't have to have a degree and you are not background checked by an establishment conventionally to be able to make thousands of dollars.
Oh.
And that's just the simple truth. So, for example, if I sell peanuts, I can't go up to somebody and be like, yeah, I need a 5-figure sum to be able to give you these peanuts, right? But someone in Orisha or someone who's interested in Orisha can go to somebody, and if they don't know any better, that person can ask them for tens of thousands of dollars for Orisha initiation and not know whether that person's even initiated or not.
You serious?
Absolutely. And it's happened. Like, there's been stories of literally people, giving all this money and never seeing the person again, or people going through the initiation rites with the person that was supposed to be initiating them because they weren't initiated at all, and they used their money to initiate themselves as well.
Oh, my goodness.
Famous story. Like, it happens all the time, and it's only getting worse now.
So can this have an actual spiritual effect, though? Because if you are not initiated and you're doing these things and you're talking to these orishas, or you're trying to do sacrifices for these orishas, and you're not even valid, there's got to be some negative consequences to that spiritually, right?
Either in this life or the next, you will face repercussions. And you know the sad thing about it is it probably won't even affect you. It'll affect your loved ones. Because I'll be frank with you, before anything happens to anybody I love, just take me out. You know, my kids, my wife, anybody, handle me, because I can't live with that. So what happens is people, you know, like you said, the money grab, or they want to have the following or the influence, and they're not prepared for what they're doing. You know, they're willing to, you know, sacrifice somebody else's destiny and well-being for a couple of dollars, not realizing that that's blood money. And then once you have the funds, oh my God, out of nowhere, something happened to your kid, something happened to your wife, something happened to your mother. Now you have to live the rest of your life looking at it and be like, that's probably because I did something I wasn't supposed to.
Wow.
And it happens all the time, brother. I know brothers that kind of lost their way and were doing things incorrectly. There's a very famous case. You know, within the Afro-Cuban 𝗲𝗲 tradition, we're only supposed to do up to 2 𝗲𝗲s at a time, initiate 2 𝗲𝗷𝗍s at a time. But one brother, you know, he initiated 4 in one room. Very taboo.
Like a group setting?
Pretty much. Now in Africa, they don't have these issues. They don't have those contexts. But our lineage, there's a reason for this, right? 2 at a time. That's more than enough too, because for anybody that's actually worked a well-done 𝗲𝗲, even with 1, you're exhausted. 2, we're just obliterated. But, you know, sometimes it calls for it. So he does the 4 𝗲𝗲s at once. You know, everybody's hooraying because they saved a couple dollars, right? Because they didn't have to get something that they needed. So everybody's, you know, enjoying the money and whatnot. And he was supposed to bring his niece over from Cuba. And lady had her whole life ahead of her, man. Healthy, athletic. I think she, you know, studied dance or sports or something like that. She just had the whole world in front of her. Out of nowhere, catches a 1 in a million bacteria and passes away right before she's supposed to come over.
No.
And this is one.
She got the amoeba.
I don't know what it was, but, you know, strong, healthy young lady expired. So, you know, maybe he put the dots together. Maybe he didn't. But me being a father and me being, you know, a husband, I'm like, I don't even want any doubts. I don't even want any possibilities of any of my actions spiritually or professionally negatively affecting my loved ones. It shouldn't be that way, because when you do things correctly, 𝗲𝗲 is only supposed to be positive. It's only supposed to promote growth and prosperity and progress and all these beautiful things. I always say my whole goal every time I do an initiation or a process is to be able to sleep at night. That's it. After, like, for example, like the 3rd day of the hand of 𝗲𝗲, there's times when it's like a 15, 16-hour day. We'll usually kick off at around 8:30 a.m. And I usually do 4 of them at a time. The 𝗲𝗷 will speak to each person for an hour. We're going through all processes and ceremonies. You know, there's times I don't lay my head down till like 2, 3 in the morning. Wow. But my goal is at the end of that day, after that 72-hour process or at the end of 𝗲𝗲, whatever, I want to be able to lay in my bed and just look up and fall asleep with no inhibitions whatsoever, because I did everything correct to the best of my abilities, you know, and knowledge. So a lot of people aren't moving like that. They could really care less, you know. So
that's scary when you think about it, man.
Yeah, and this is where all this modern, you know, context is really destroying things now, because without elders, without people who bring us in, who is there to monitor us? Because 𝗲𝗲 is a self-policing, self-supervising organism, right? Where maybe the USDA doesn't audit us, but we as the 𝗲𝗷𝗍 should be auditing, right? Based on our individual houses and lineage. Like, for example, the gentleman that I've been able to initiate, I have 5 𝗲𝗲s at this moment. I'm the one watching them. I'm the one who gives them the 𝗪 to say whether you can do a reading by yourself at this point or not. Have you shown the preparation to be able to handle somebody else's destiny at this moment? I'm the one who gives the green light on that, me and my conscience and my preparation. But if you have somebody who just goes to a Botanica with a list and gets a couple ingredients and throws them in a pot like 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗲, and all of a sudden I'm a 𝗹𝗲𝗍 or a Santeria or a 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗲 or whatever you want to be, who's to say you know what you're doing or not? Because you got that information from an irreputable source online where it's pretty much a cesspool of literature. So where do we end at that point? You know, we're literally intoxicating people and malpracticing people on a daily basis at that point, and no one's there to monitor anything. So it's just it becomes a free for all.
Super scary, man. That's
Yeah, imagine if that happened in medicine. It's like a doctor saying, "Yeah, I'm a doctor. I read Medicine for Dummies or 101, and yeah, give me the scalpel."
I use ChatGPT for all my diagnosis.
It's unacceptable. Or God forbid, you're in an operating room and it's like, "All right, first incision," and the guy's like, "Can you pass me the book? I gotta refresh how this is done."
That just gave me some scary thoughts there.
Yeah, it's terrifying. It's and that's not the level of preparation you want from the professional that you're contracting, especially if we're talking about these kind of amounts or this intensity of, process, whether it's a surgery, whether it's doing 𝗲𝗲 to a gentleman, whether it's initiating somebody in orisha, a hand of 𝗲𝗲, like, you have to go through that process. And, reading from a book, there is no blessing there. Remember that only things that are blessed by your elders will be blessed by Olodumare and Orunmila. My godfather always told me something, and my Yubona too. He said, "He who's on good terms with his elders is on good terms with 𝗲𝗲 and Orula." So if you don't have elders, Orula doesn't even know who you are. 𝗲𝗲 doesn't know who you are. Nature does not recognize you because you haven't been aligned yet. So when you go online to Scribd or whatever you think is legitimate or not, and you try to recreate a process with a paper in your hand, there is no blessing there. It's not like when I say, "Okay, we're taking you through the hand of 𝗲𝗲. I'm Joseph. I trained under this guy and this guy. I got expressed 𝗃𝗍 to be able to do these processes." You see the results, like, wow, things are going well. Things went well afterwards. It's like, for example, I just did 𝗃𝗏 to a gentleman, right? He visited us from Atlanta with his significant other. Beautiful people. And, we performed an 𝗃𝗏 from his sign. He just messaged me the other day. He said, I can't even express, my disbelief, but all of a sudden my blood pressure regulated and I'm not even on medication, things like that, where people will be like, "Well, Joseph, are you taking a little too much credit there?" I'm not taking credit at all. I'm just saying within the proximity of doing a spiritual process, this seemingly inexplicable event has occurred. So I'm not saying I made that happen. I'm not even saying Orula made it happen, but it did happen. So the most important thing is that it did, and timing is everything, I think. So, things like that, when it's done correctly, it's amazing, but it's done in a way where I've been given the green light to do that, just like I've given other people the green light, and the 𝗃𝗍 is the key part there, But other orishas that had to go through this process, I mean, we spoke about Odua, Orula, Gayu, Oshosi, but another orisha that went through very specific initiation processes was Osun. When we look in the Osun got initiated in three signs ultimately, Oshetura, Obeyono, and 𝗃𝗏𝗍𝗂𝗃𝗍. And some people would say 𝗃𝗏𝗍𝗂𝗃𝗍 as well, like it's an interchangeable story. But the one that I like to focus on for Osun is going to be 𝗃𝗏𝗍𝗂𝗃𝗍, because in that sign, Osun was a medium. She would divine spiritually with like jícaras of water or 𝗃𝗏s of water. She had a client come who was ultimately revealed as Osun, who received a reading where Osun didn't want to read him no more. He tried to, accost her. She resisted because she wasn't into him like that, like in various stories. And Osun did witchcraft to her and she lost her eyesight. A gentleman named 𝗃𝗏𝗶𝗏𝗍𝗂𝗃, who used to see Osun come in and out of her house, he lived in the village, noticed that she hadn't come out in a couple of days and was worried. So he went in to see how she was, and when he saw her, she was in a state of squalor, because she couldn't see. She explained what had happened, and he said, "Let me take you to Orunmila," and when he took her, divination was performed, 𝗃𝗏𝗍𝗂𝗃𝗍 was revealed, where 𝗃𝗲 said that she needed to perform orisha to be able to get the witchcraft off of her and get her eyesight back and align with her destiny. So, basically at that moment, she said, "Well, yeah, I'll do it." Even though she was a medium, even though she was divining, even all these other things, she said, "I can't do this to myself. I need somebody to take me." And who ultimately took her into the room of initiation was under the guidance of Orunmila and 𝗃𝗏𝗏𝗍𝗂𝗃. So even Osun, even Miss, Peacock, even Miss, Jar of Honey in Winnie the Pooh's 100-Acre Wood, she still was like, "I need help." Because at the end of the day, if you arrive to Orisha, it's because you need help, because you can't help yourself. So the most important thing is having the humility to recognize it, just like all of these gods did, and our spirituality will be okay. But self-initiation is actually taboo. If you are delving into it in any context, not even just 𝗲𝗏, anything, whether you do Reiki, you have to get attuned by somebody. If you want to, initiate into Kabbalah, you need a rabbi. You want to be a Sufi, you need to, be mentored by the brothers over there. At the end of the day, you need somebody because no one was born knowing everything. That's what the amniotic fluid in our mother's stomach guarantees. And the reason 𝗹𝗶𝗸𝗶𝗍 exists is to force us to have to find others and fraternize to learn from. So, self-initiation, big no bueno.
Wow, I didn't even. I had a feeling that it was big like that because there's got to be a lot of phonies out there.
Mm-hmm.
But man, I didn't realize the consequences behind that, man.
Well, I tell you what, there's some consequences if we don't do these shout outs.
Well, luckily for you and everybody watching.
Yeah.
It's that time, guys. So guess what? It's time to show some love to the people who show love to the channel. If you're wondering, directly under this video, there's a little join button. And what that does, that takes you to a magical land of extra content. So that means extra shows just for members, discounts on merch, exclusive items, and you're the first to get the new episodes.
Get in there, guys.
So here we go.
Here we go.
VIPs, we got Tiffany Nicole.
Tiffany.
We got 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗲𝗍𝗂.
Thank you.
We got Veronica Baza.
Boruboya.
We got Joe Smith.
Ashe.
And for the supers, we got Andrew Casanovi.
Thank you, Andrew.
And shout out to my new favorite person, 16G.
16G. G to the 16th power, man.
And then rounding out, we got Lorena Acosta.
Thank you guys so much. And if you haven't had the opportunity, get in the membership program. It has all the benefits that Phil just mentioned. And be sure to mention it to somebody who can gain some value from it. Couple closing thoughts. BotanicaCandlesandMore.com is up and running for all services and needs. As far as products go, we do ship. If you can't catch us on YouTube, be sure to catch the podcast on any of the major audio platforms that are out there.
Yeah, dude, you're on iHeartRadio.
Oh my gosh.
You didn't even know that. You're on iHeart, Apple, Spotify, Amazon. So if you say you're Alexa, hey Alexa, play Our Roots, it'll do that.
And you'll hear this lovely silky voice. Be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Big thank you from all of us here, and until next time, see the light.